choose his future.
We're supposed to have everything under one roof.
I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you. I want to be with you.
Before destiny takes control. Sharon Stone, Richard Gere. Intersection, tonight at 10 on BBC One.
This is BBC One, the 9 o'clock news and campaign report with Michael Buerk.
The President of the European Commission has intervened in the election here. The Eurosceptics, he said, were prophets of doom who didn't know what they were talking about. How the IRA paralysed London with a few phone calls. And right on cue, the fastest ever maximum break at £1,000 a point. Good evening. The President of the European Commission, Jacques Santer, deliberately intervened in the British election campaign today by calling the Eurosceptics doom merchants, scoring cheap points at Brussels' expense. He said the only option was to move on to closer European integration. His remarks were criticised by the Conservatives and Labour. Europe correspondent James Robbins reports.
Jacques Santer denies intervening in the election campaign, but his speech could hardly have been blunter. He called it boldly a message for the sceptics. The Commission President said the frequent outbursts of Eurosceptics were unjustified and misplaced.
Those who criticize, do they know what they are talking about? Do they have an equally stimulating alternative? Do these doom merchants want us to step backwards towards a Europe only composed of simple trading arrangements?
But Mr. Santer was not content simply to call the sceptics merchants of doom. Looking ahead to the next time the 15 heads of government meet within weeks of the election, he warned whoever represents Britain then must accept substantial curbs on the national veto. Many more decisions must be taken by majority voting among governments. Anything else risks paralysing the Union, he said, as it expands to include Eastern Europe.
The more numerous we are, the more difficult it will become to agree unanimously. No one wants gridlock. In order to avoid this, we must widen the use of majority voting as much as possible.
And by the end, Mr. Santer had championed everything which has provoked doubt or outright hostility in Britain. The single currency, greater powers for the European Parliament, even giving the European Union a military capability. Whatever his motives, the Commission President could scarcely have been more provocative. Although Jacques Santer never mentioned Britain in his speech, he didn't need to. Everyone in his audience and across Europe knows who he was talking about. The savagery and timing of this attack is unprecedented. But there was also a coded warning for Tony Blair in the event that he becomes Prime Minister. A warning that much of the rest of Europe will keep up the pressure for further integration. James Robbins, BBC News, Amsterdam.
Tonight, John Major said Jacques Santer's remarks proved that Europe was bent on ever closer integration, and he accused Tony Blair of planning to put his foot on the accelerator to a federal Europe. Our political editor Robin Oakley has spent the day with John Major's campaign.
The Tories assembling in York were the party faithful, the kind who cannot and will not believe the opinion polls. If they were worried by the party's doubts and divisions on Europe, they weren't showing it. And they were ready to applaud Mr. Major's condemnation of Jacques Santer's argument that Europe needed more watering down of national vetoes if it were not to be paralysed.
I disagree. Unlike the Labour Party, I will retain our vetoes in Europe. If it's right for Britain, I will keep my feet on the brakes. Mr. Blair would go to Amsterdam and put his foot on the accelerator of a federal Europe.
The Prime Minister judged one swipe enough for Monsieur Santer. For Mr. Blair, there were many more. Labour's leader, he said, had had the choice when he came into politics. Margaret Thatcher or Old Labour. He'd chosen Old Labour, and no matter how far he travelled, he could never escape the shadow of his past. There was exposition of Tory policy, on pensions, on tougher sentencing. But Mr. Blair was attacked at length for having opposed every Tory reform.
Wrong on council houses. Wrong on tax cuts, wrong on school choice, wrong on tougher sentences, wrong on grant-maintained schools, wrong on personal pensions, wrong on privatisation, wrong on wider share ownership.
Not that much passion and a familiar theme. trust me, don't trust the other fellow. Earlier, education had been the Tory theme, and the most testing task for Mr. Major, who kept his soapbox under wraps on a low-key campaigning day, was being quizzed by the would-be Dimblebis Paxmans of the Leeds Grammar Sixth Form.
Do you genuinely think that you can get back in and win the election?
Yep, I do. Absolutely genuinely.
The matter is that...
Absolutely genuinely.
But all of the polls show that you're at least 15, 14 points behind.
Polls are rubbish. 4 days before the last...
But the question Mr. Major wants the public focused on is who can best be trusted to fight Britain's battles at the forthcoming Euro summit. Europe is coming ever closer to the heart of the election campaign, and Mr. Major believes that for all the display of Tory divisions on the issue, it is still one he can turn to his party's advantage. As the reaction of tonight's audience showed, by providing an outside target which the party can unite in attacking, Monsieur Santa has clearly done him a service. Robin Oakley, BBC News, York.
Labour too poured scorn on Mr Santa's intervention. It said he should be in no doubt that a Labour government would make decisions based on British needs in the British interests. Earlier, Tony Blair responded to Conservative attacks on his ability to negotiate in Europe. He criticised what he called John Major's incompetent leadership and said he was the only leader strong enough to fight for Britain. Our political correspondent Jeremy Vine is following the Blair campaign.
Okay. Yeah. Good to see you. Mr Blair must have thought he'd lost his chance of this kind of reception when he gave up rock music. But in Chester, 100 years after this clock started ticking, the Labour leader spoke as if he believed the Conservatives had only 11 days left.
That this country, under a new and revitalised Labour Party, is going to have the future it deserves and its people need.
But Mr Blair knows he personally is under intense examination now. What kind of leader will he be? His answer in a big speech in Manchester this morning was effectively, what you've seen is what you'll get. Mr Blair says his leadership of Labour shows he's ready for the country. And as for the idea that he's too naive to negotiate in Europe,
I know how to negotiate, and I know how to lead. John Major can do neither. How can his government negotiate in Europe when it cannot even agree its objectives in Europe?
So this was about leadership, and it was also about Europe, with Labour determined in this campaign to appear constructively sceptical.
Other Europeans, despite what we are sometimes told here, are not involved in some Gadarene rush towards a European superstate. In fact, there is a good deal of unease at the pace and direction of integration in many continental countries, not just Britain. And if there were a desire for a superstate, then we would not hesitate to stop it.
Ambassadors and diplomats heard Mr Blair range far and wide over foreign policy, but many of them may well have been quietly reflecting on the extent to which Europe is a preoccupation. On the single currency, Labour are stressing one point again and again.
So if a Labour government were to decide to enter a single currency in the course of the next Parliament, and that is a big if, I give my word there will be a referendum before we are committed to entering. That is our cast iron pledge to the people.
And then a declaration that was both intensely political and personal.
I am a British patriot, and I am proud of being a British patriot. I love my country. I will always put the interests of my country first.
On the streets of Chester, Mr Blair had spoken of pensions, the health service and education. But for Labour, the advantage of a speech like today's is that Mr Blair is talking directly into the Conservative debate on Europe. The big question underscoring his message is whether voters will decide Mr Blair's leadership of his party qualifies him to lead the country. Jeremy Vine, BBC News, Chester.
The Liberal Democrat leader, Paddy Ashdown, has been concentrating his fire on education, but he insisted that on Europe, it was not Jack Santa's voice that mattered, but that of the British people. On a visit to a school in Cornwall, Mr Ashdown reiterated his party's message that they'd increase taxation to raise standards in schools. Our political correspondent Matthew Amroliwala reports from the Ashdown campaign.
Don't you put them on these colours as well?
The Liberal Democrats have campaigned relentlessly on education and health. Getting them to talk about anything else today was difficult, with one exception. Europe, the jack-in-the-box that is now out and providing Paddy Ashdown with a daily stick to beat Mr Major.
I have no doubt whatsoever that the train that Mr Major has allowed himself to be bundled on board, driven by the Eurosceptics, the destination of that train is not the election. The destination of that train is to take Britain from an edge of Europe country to an out of Europe country. Be in no doubt whatsoever. The aim of the skeptics in Britain is to ensure that Britain leaves Europe altogether, and that would be devastating.
But this is what made Mr Ashdown really angry this afternoon. Leaky roofs and rotting walls at a school in the southwest.
But is there anything we can do about that?
Hack all the plaster up and start again. But it's so bad that we haven't got the money. No.
Mr Ashdown then went one-to-one with a pupil who asked him how things would be different with the Liberal Democrat government.
If you were to do this stuff.
Well, let me see. What it would be like is this.
Smaller classes, more books, said a straight-faced Paddy Ashdown, all paid for by a penny on income tax. At another school in the region, the politics was rather rougher, as older pupils campaigned in their own mock election.
And how are the others doing?
Okay, they're using dirty tricks so far.
But on a day when the Prime Minister trumpeted his desire to put a grammar school in every town, Mr Ashdown was happy to trade punches on education.
What education really needs is investment, and unless you provide it, you can't raise standards, and it's a desperate attempt to appeal for votes at a time when the Tories know that they're losing it.
There's absolutely nothing subtle in this election. This morning, the Liberal Democrats wheeled out a lottery machine just in time for a rather strange soundbite on the NHS, their other theme of the day.
Yes, this is entirely a lottery. Whether you're a winner depends on whether you're in the right place at the right time. It depends whether your number comes up.
What's been markedly different about this campaign is just how little time Paddy Ashdown has spent talking about proportional representation. The party's learned from mistakes in 1992 and believe that health and education are far more likely to motivate voters. The question, though, is whether they or Labour will be the ones to benefit. Matthew Amroliwala, BBC News, with the Ashdown campaign.
That's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the programme. But now the rest of the day's news. Roads and rail services in and around London. And Baker, a former Bishop of Salisbury, also said there should be a Christian ceremony for gays in a committed relationship. His remarks come only days after the Archbishop of Canterbury repeated that practising homosexuals will not be ordained. Our religious affairs correspondent Alex Kirby reports.
One of central London's best-known churches, St Martin in the Fields, was an apt setting for a lecture which blew apart the Church of England's carefully contrived silence on priestly homosexuality. It was a crowded meeting, and some of the bishop's arguments struck an evident chord.
I cannot see that we married heterosexual clergy have a right to deny our homosexual brothers and sisters the potential spiritual blessing of a sexual relationship when we ourselves enjoy that blessing.
Only last week, the Archbishop of Canterbury restated the Church's teaching. It will not ordain sexually active gay people. In a statement this evening, Dr. Carey said the Bishop's lecture deserved to be read with respect, though there would be no sudden change in the Church's official position. And Dr. Carey added, Bishop John Baker's conclusions suggest a very significant departure from the Church's current mind and discipline.
Nobody, I think, in their senses would expect a sudden change. But if matters do go on in serious discussion, and we know that the Church has got to do this because it will come up in General Synod, it will be on the agenda of the Lambeth Conference, there is no getting away from it.
Last November's lesbian and gay Christian movement service in Southwark Cathedral gave the campaigners new hope. Tonight, they say that was reinforced.
The view that the bishop expanded shows that the Church has space for lesbian and gay Christians in loving same-sex relationships.
What the bishop said here tonight is certainly controversial, so much so that it could possibly split the Church of England. But if anyone can move the polarised debate further forward, then John Austin Baker, with his combination of learning and humility, is perhaps the man. Alex Kirby, BBC News, Central London.
The Alliance and Leicester became a bank today, the first of several. State of council housing. But first over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Mike.
The Scottish Trade Unions Conference has called for a clear timetable for the return of the railways to public ownership. It's the first deviation from Labour policy at a conference some Conservatives hope to be able to portray as the unacceptable face of the Labour movement. In London, Labour spokesman carefully underlined that the STUC has nothing to do with them. All the same, they were startlingly well informed about events in Glasgow.
This is how the Tories still portray the unions, making deals in smoke-filled rooms. They say one of the mysteries of the election is the absence of union leaders from frontline campaigning. Today, one of them admitted he had been keeping a low profile.
Congress, you may have noticed that some of us have not been doing much public speaking during the last few weeks. Indeed, it was suggested to me that I might plead some other engagement rather than come to Glasgow. But I've already washed my hair once this week. It didn't take very long. So here I am.
Labour keeps emphasising that the STUC has no influence over party policy, but the debates here could provide ammunition for their political critics. Delegates wonder whether that was why a procedural manoeuvre kept a controversial resolution on the minimum wage off the conference agenda. That prevented Rodney Bickerstaff, leader of the public service union Unison, from making a speech demanding that a Labour government set the minimum rate at £4.42 an hour.
Disappointed not to have got your resolution debated today?
There'll be plenty of opportunities to talk about low pay in the future. There's a low pay commission, we'll be putting our views to it, and the new Labour government will think about it along with all the other contributions.
The resolutions here had been described by Labour's opponents as an agenda from hell. In fact, the debates have been rather muted, but there is evidence that the restraint being shown by union leaders is causing them some frustration. John Fryer, BBC News, Glasgow.
The Tories, convinced that parents want more grammar schools, are producing more and more policy on selection. This morning, the Education Secretary, Gillian Shepherd, set out the details of plans for more independence for schools, including the right to select. She argues that selection raises standards all round.
Wherever there are grammar schools, standards are higher. So it's no wonder that grammar schools and selection are popular with parents. And we, unlike Labour, believe in parent power and parental choice.
The Liberal Democrats and Labour said the majority of pupils would lose out under the proposals.
The reality is that what John Major is proposing is grammar schools for the few at the expense of the education of the many, a divided two-tier education system unfair to 90% of the pupils, more failing schools, more second-class schools as a result. And I think what parents will take out of this, particularly mothers, is that their child's education is no longer safe with the Conservatives.
This means a return to selection, which of course means a return to deselection for many, indeed the majority. It means a return to the bad old days of the 11 plus and 5 or 6 secondary moderns in every town, and a second-class education system for the vast majority.
At the last election, Norman Lamont was Chancellor of the Exchequer, the kingmaker, who in 1990 had run John Major's successful leadership campaign. Then came Black Wednesday, early retirement from government, and as his constituency disappeared in boundary changes, it almost looked as if he was facing early retirement from politics. But now he's back, standing in Harrogate, yet keeping a vanishingly low national profile.
In the genteel town of Harrogate, one of the best-known candidates in the country is standing for election. But little's been heard from him during the campaign. The local shopkeepers say they see the leading Euroskeptic, but the media haven't been so lucky. The local Tory party HQ had already turned away numerous requests for interviews before we made ours. But it's clearly not because he's out of town.
Oh, hello, Mr. Lamont. Can we ask
Hello.
you a couple of questions about your campaign?
Well, I'd rather do it.
The answer is no. The Liberal Democrats, in second place here last time, claim they haven't seen much of their opponent.
He's almost been invisible. Harrogate, as was previous MP, was known as the Invisible Man, and it's been difficult to pin down Norman Lamont.
And members of the Labour Party campaign accuse him of deliberately avoiding the public eye.
He's just not being seen at the moment. He seems to be keeping out of the way.
Past publicity highlighted a record of disloyalty to the Prime Minister, which meant Mr. Lamont had to try a number of seats before being selected to fight Harrogate. Even here, one local Tory still resents Mr Lamont's record so much, he's standing himself as an independent, loyal Conservative.
This time I don't feel that I can vote for Mr Lamont.
So Mr Lamont is steering clear of controversy on the national stage. But that doesn't mean he's turned loyalist over Europe. Locally, his views are there for all to see. In this leaflet, it reads, "No surrender, keep the pound, no to the euro."
Very good.
Mr Lamont asks cabinet friends to speak for him. Whether or not they agree, publicly they can't support his message. So isn't it an awkward request?
No, it's not an uncomfortable position at all. All of the candidates of the Conservative Party are campaigning on a platform of being in Europe but not run by Europe.
As with pre-budget purdah, the former Chancellor's pre-election silence is likely to be short-lived. Emma Udwin, BBC News, Harrogate.
And there are a total of 4 candidates contesting the Harrogate and Knaresborough seat. And that's all from us. Back to you, Mike.
And thanks. The party which wins power in 10 days' time will have to decide how to help the homeless and repair millions of council homes at a time of tight public spending. The Conservatives aim to raise £25 billion through private investment. They let council tenants vote to transfer to private housing companies. Councils will be penalised if they don't hold a vote. Their borrowing for housing investment will be limited. One of Labour's few spending commitments is to improve housing. It would release frozen receipts from council house sales to do it. It too would allow tenants to switch to new housing companies, but without penalising councils which don't hold a vote. The Liberal Democrats would let councils borrow for housing projects under strict control. They too would release money from council house sales to build homes. And they'd introduce a mortgage benefit for first-time buyers, which they get instead of tax relief. Our local government correspondent John Andrew reports on housing policy.
For a dream home by the sea, there can be few more perfect places than the West Country. But in Plymouth, like many other cities, lurks the less pretty face of housing today. Under the Conservatives, home ownership has been the cornerstone of housing policy. In 18 years, it's grown to almost 70% of households, propelled by the huge success of Right to Buy. But at the same time, investment in public rented housing has steadily declined and is now at its lowest levels for half a century. In Plymouth alone, more than 7,000 people are waiting for a council home, many living in inadequate or overcrowded conditions. Nicky and Kerry are on the council's priority list. For them and their 6-week-old baby daughter, home is a single room, a third-floor bedsit rented from a private landlord. It's not the sort of place they plan to bring up their first child.
There's no space. You can't move. There's nowhere to go in here, really. Just cramped around. There's an Ophi for the baby. Even the landlord, he said it's an Ophi.
We haven't got no hot water, so we have to boil the kettle every time we want to bath her and that. Getting up and down the stairs with the pram is a bit dangerous, so I've slipped a couple times.
For 3 of us, it's way too small. We just need our own place. A bit more security, really.
In many inner city areas, there are often council flats available, but no great rush to take them up. Kerry and Nicky turned down the offer of a flat on this estate, worried by the levels of crime and drug dealing in the area. Devonport is part of the most deprived ward in the country. Despite this, these tenants wouldn't live anywhere else. Many have grown up on the estate and share a sense of community pride. They just want the council to improve their living conditions.
Hi, everybody. Well, thanks for coming.
Water seeps in through the walls and windows of their ageing tower block. Their estate, like 2,000 others across Britain, is in need of major repairs.
The problem I've got here is the leaking with the roof, the dampness coming in through the windows, and now it's starting to come in the bedroom and the toilet. Fungus going out of the carpet, the dampness everywhere.
It's disgusting when people my age, I'm 66, got to live in conditions like this. Yeah. I've been on the council all my life, my mother before me, and I've never had to live in the conditions I'm living in now, ever.
The national repair bill for council housing is enormous. The Chartered Institute of Housing puts the figure at £20 billion. Whoever wins the election, there's no way that the taxpayer is going to foot that bill. In future, the name of the game, as in so many other areas of public spending, will be private finance. And soon, many council tenants could find themselves voting in a very different election, deciding whether to stay with the council or transfer to a new landlord who will borrow the money privately to improve their homes and build new ones. For the Conservatives, this is the key to improving rundown estates. They want to transfer 2 million homes, more than half the entire council stock, to new housing companies. Councils that don't agree would be penalised and not allowed to borrow as much money for housing investment. Labour too is keen on transfer, but wouldn't force councils to do it. Because no housing companies exist yet, it's difficult to assess how they'd work. But this estate in Devonport, transformed with government money, shows what can be done. The tenants here, who now manage their own estate, have seen crime levels plunge and health improve.
It's like living in a different place altogether. It's quiet night times. There's no rowdiness. People take pride in where they're living now. Before, there was rubbish just thrown out the windows. They didn't bother even going down and putting it in the bin sheds, you know, it was just thrown.
But thousands more flats need the same treatment. And though the council knows it can't rely on public money alone, it doesn't see the sense of transferring estates to the private sector.
City councils like Plymouth already borrow their money through the private sector at a cheaper interest rate. We are seen as blue chip companies, and as such, if we can borrow the money more cheaply, which is what we can do, then the rent and the housing benefit bill is actually lower for the taxpayer through the United Kingdom.
The building of new social housing is running at less than half the level most experts say is needed. The Liberal Democrats would allow councils, within strict limits, to go to the markets to raise the money they need. Labour's big idea is to release the locked-up money from council house sales. The phased release of the cash, some £5 billion, is one of the party's few big spending pledges. But there are limitations. Labour will be inheriting a Tory budget which last year slashed housing investment by a third, and that's a decision it wouldn't reverse.
Labour's release of receipts could add about £1 billion a year investment over a 5-year period, but that would only take us back to the position we were in of a couple of years ago in terms of resources, and it is not enough to meet the outstanding investment requirements.
The days of mass social housing funded by the taxpayer have gone, and that will bring its own problems, with private finance leading to higher rents and a bigger cost in housing benefit. Kerry and Nikki are a step nearer the home they want. They've been told that a flat in an area more to their liking could be theirs in a matter of weeks. But for many thousands of others, the wait for a decent home could be much longer. John Andrew, BBC News.
And you can find out more information on the party's policies on housing in our election fact file on page 130 of CFAX after this bulletin. And the main news from the election campaign again, the European Commission President Jacques Santer has strongly criticised Eurosceptic politicians in Britain who oppose closer ties with Europe. He said they were doom merchants who didn't know what they were talking about. Both Labour and the Conservatives were quick to reject Mr Santer's intervention, but in an interview with the BBC's Panorama tonight, the Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown made it clear his party was still strongly in favour of closer ties with Europe and was proud to be called federalist.
The truth of it is that we ascribe to a democratic, decentralised, diverse Europe. If you want to have those three adjectives and put them in a single word, it's federal, and I don't mind using it.
And the BBC's political editor, Robin Oakley, joins me now from Buerk, where the Prime Minister was speaking earlier this evening. Robin, this intervention by Jacques Santer is a bit of a gift for the Tories, isn't it?
Well, indeed, Michael. One senior Tory described it to me tonight as manna from heaven. Mr Major has been going through this election campaign saying not enough notice is being taken of the drive for further integration in Europe, the push on towards a federal Britain. It's just the kind of issue he wants to see on the electoral menu. And of course, because Monsieur Santa has done this from outside, it's a way of the Tories uniting against a common enemy and taking the focus off the single currency and getting together on their anti-federalist message.
Labour's told Mr Santa off for interfering. He seems to have succeeded only in putting pressure on Labour to go in a more Eurosceptic direction. Hardly the outcome he would have wanted.
Not indeed. Labour do face the difficulty that part of their pitch is being rather more pro-European, rather more European-friendly than the government have been. So it is something of an embarrassment for them. But they're pointing out it's a pretty good embarrassment for Mr Major too, because he said that Mr Santa, when he was appointed, was the right man in the right job at the right time. But what we are seeing here, I think, is something of a competition in Euroscepticism between the two major parties, which is just what Europe's politicians were dreading at the last Euro summit the British general election would become. It could mean that whoever wins the election is left with no room for manoeuvre when they get to Amsterdam for that summit and the crucial decisions.
I suppose the real question about Europe is whether the Tories will lose more votes because of the splits in their party than they gain by appearing Eurosceptic.
Well, I was fascinated to find, talking to some of the Tory backroom boys today, they really believe that something is starting to move for them on the European issue. For the first time in this election campaign, they were predicting to me a significant turnaround in the polls this week, and they think that will happen on the European issue. But Labour say the key issue on the doorstep is leadership weakness.
Robin Oakley, thanks very much indeed. And that's all from the newsroom tonight. News nights on BBC 2 at 10:35. But from the 9 o'clock news, good night.